Welcome to another international podcast on Metallwoche. Today we are glad to talk to Gerald Celente from Kingston, New York once again. Gerald is one of the top trend forecasters in the world, don't laugh about me, director of the Trends Research Institute and editor and publisher of the Trends Journal. Welcome back, Gerald. Good to have you with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Michael.
Yesterday, your Trends in the News show was all about Zizzy Juice and Jive at the Mohegan in uptown colonial Kingston. I saw that, Gerald. You said you were sick of talking about John Kerry anymore, and therefore you made this episode of Trends in the News very special. It was a great show. Great job, Gerald. Thank you very much for that, and that makes you different to many others.
Thank you. No, it's the same story over and over, and I just cannot believe that people listen to people like Kerry or any of these. You pick your president, prime minister, wherever you're from, it's the same BS lines over and over again. And I'm so disgusted with hearing John Kerry. You know, the reason they're so arrogant, and I worked as the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate as a young man, 23 years old. And I saw what goes on in politics. And the reason that these politicians speak so arrogantly to people is they think they're speaking to their staff, because the staff is always bowing down, sucking up, and trying to move their way up to the top. So it's, yes, Mr. Secretary, no, Mr. Secretary, yes, Senator, no, Senator. And so they're in a bubble, and they think that they're preaching to their kids and their staff, and they're really talking to us. They're losers, and nobody wants to call it that. So every day I go through Trends in the News, I read what they say they're going to do, and they never do it. There's not one thing that you could look at for Kerry and say, oh, there's a great success. He's a loser, and nobody wants to call him that. The Mideast peace talks, it's a piece of crap. I've said it from the beginning. All of my life I've heard about Mideast peace talks, and they're nothing. They're nothing. They're just propaganda. Then you saw Kerry, he wanted to go into Syria. He was in front of the Congress, the Senate, pushing to go into Syria last year. And now he's talking about doing it again. And now he's talking about Russia and how Russia is meddling in Ukraine. You want to talk about hypocrisy? Anybody that knows that it was the United States and the European Union that fomented the coup of Yanukovych.
Exactly. Gerald, yesterday, before we come over to the Ukraine, I saw a couple of lines what I find quite interesting, and I want to have your opinion, because it's exactly the same topic. A couple of days ago, Senator Jim Rich from Idaho said during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on the State Department budget a couple of days ago, quote, "You can't help but get the impression our foreign policy is just spinning out of control." And he was citing developments in Russia, Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but he focused on the Russian-Ukraine situation as well. And then he said, this administration said they were going to hit the reset button with Moscow. And I can't help think that somebody hits the wrong button. Is he right, Gerald?
Well, again, even just think of that language. They're talking to us like kids. Hit the wrong button. You know what I mean? There is disaster at every level, as I said. And this has more to do with, if anybody wants a view from America of what's going on in Ukraine, chronicled as it happened, I would suggest they go to Paul Craig Roberts, paulcraigroberts.org. He was the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, and he's been following this step by step. The Ukraine is only a smaller part of United States foreign policy set by the neocons, the people that began the Afghan war, the Iraq war, the war on terror, the war on robbing us of our rights, and their war for United States hegemony. And going on in Ukraine is just another step of that. How would it be if Russia had alliances with Mexico and Canada and had ballistic missiles faced at the United States, and Russian troops, in the name of NATO, we'll call it something else, in Russia and, in Canada and in Mexico? That's what the United States has done to Russia. Right. They've treated Russia as though they've lost the Cold War. They're putting missile systems, they want to put them in the Czech Republic and in Poland. They're talking about putting 10,000 NATO troops in Poland. They're circling Russia when you look at the map. So this Ukraine is only one more step into weakening Russia, militarily.
Gerald, in the Trend Journal of January 2013, you said already that a civil war is about to break out. Now everybody is talking about civil wars. On the Ukrainian discussion, we remember that on December 13, the Assistant Secretary of State mentioned that they passed over $5 billion to support non-government organization, NGOs, over there. Now, I know that you mentioned this in your show as well, but we see the same pusher is back there. So they are all pushers, but nobody is really willing to fight, right?
Yeah, well, what they do is these legislators, just like in every other country, the people in office have the big mouths and the bad attitudes. And they start the wars, but they never fight them. They send others to go get killed,
yes.
lose their lives, their limbs, and their minds. And as we showed with the video of you can't make this up, the Ukrainian prime minister from the Svoboda party, and the video clip of him forcing the head of the Ukrainian television station to resign as they're pushing him all around the place, this guy with a ponytail. And then you saw a few days ago at the Ukrainian government, the parliament, the same guy, instigating more of that and pushing people around, literally.
Exactly, yes.
And when you look at the reason why this fight broke out in Ukraine at the parliament, is because one of the speakers, the speaker at the time, was saying, how can you criticize what's going on in Donetsk with the Russian population when the same thing happened in Kiev and you were supporting it when the people were protesting? What's the difference over here? And so the hypocrisy, of course, and that's when they attacked him. So what you have, and you have it right here in the States, and I was mentioning Kerry again, another guy shooting off his mouth, sending other people to go fight and die. These people are psychopaths and sociopaths, and nobody wants to call them what they are. Instead, they call them Mr. Secretary, Mr. President, and Mr. Prime Minister.
I think we have to take this all into a bigger picture as well. But finally, we are talking money here. When the Fed just gave the banks, once again I have to add, 2 more years to get rid of their risky loans, to get under the Volcker Rule, 2 days ago the Wall Street Journal wrote that Goldman Sachs may be in the process of shutting down their Sigma X dark pool clearing. Little more than 2 weeks ago, they first announced that they would no longer play in the high-frequency trading games and followed this by announcing they would give up their designated market maker status on the NICE. Gerald, you mentioned a couple of times in the past that the house of cards is coming down. Does Goldman Sachs maybe know that there could be another Lehman Brothers moment in the offering, and the wrong house is going to make the wrong bet?
Yes, and what you talked about with the easing of the Volcker Rule, let me just back up on that. There was no need for a Volcker Rule. All they had to do was reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act in its entirety. The Volcker Rule is just a lot of fluff and doing very little, and as you mentioned, they're holding back some of it for 2 years. What this is also allowing to happen, it's allowing more of the hedge funds, the pension groups, and the others to make heavy speculations. in markets, but they're not covered by any kind of reserves. So they, unlike a bank, they don't have to have anything in the bank, and they could just keep betting away. And that's what they also did by easing these rules that was supposed to be put into place. So in effect, what they've done is they've created another speculative market that's unregulated. And the speculative market will continue to grow at bubble proportions as long as interest rates continue to stay low. So you have the mergers and acquisitions, all of these hedge fund and venture capitalist activities going on. You're seeing the mergers, for example, now of the greatest cement companies, so more monopolies and more consolidation because money's so cheap. So they're building a bigger bubble. I also would look at PIMCO. And the reason being, as you know, they're the largest bond traders in the world. The reason being is that they're getting a lot of negative press lately. And when this kind of thing happens, they're usually a target. Somebody's angry someplace at a deal done somewhere or many deals. So I would look at PIMCO too. I believe that a financial house is going to collapse. And that is what's going to cause another run of stimulating. They will blame the collapse on the need to keep interest rates continually low and for another round of quantitative easing. They'll call it something else. They'll use a different excuse. Again, I don't think anybody out there denies the fact that the only reason, and you can name whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it's the US, whether it's Japan, they're all dumping cheap money into the system. And once that interest rates go up, money becomes expensive, this false recovery fails. So when they have a failure by a big group, a Lehman Brothers event, for example, I think that's going to be their excuse to continue to juice up the economy, continue to throw cheap money into it, and that's when you're going to see the next gold bull run.
That's a topic what I will discuss with you a little bit later. It's funny, when we watch these developments, you heard that over here, the ECB is now considering a QE program as well. They talk about unconventional measures of stimulus which could involve 1 billion euros. But, Gerald, funny enough, when the news hit the wire, the euro was not getting weaker. It's actually getting even stronger to the dollar. The dollar is losing against the British pound, the Japanese yen, the Swiss francs, the Australian dollar as well. And Greece today was able to return to the bond market, believe it or not, getting 3 billion euros instead of 2.5 for a 5-year note because it was 8 times oversubscribed and yielding 4.95%. My question, Gerald, is the petrodollar already in big trouble, as Jim Rickards and Jim Sinclair are pointing out? Sinclair spoke of a nuclear option for Putin at hand in a financial war, should he decide to accept all other currencies than the US dollar for oil and gas. Do we underestimate the danger for the dollar here, Gerald?
You know, I don't know, because all the other situations are weak as well. So, you know, where do you go to? I mean, you look at the yuan, what is it? It only accounts for, about 2% of the trading on the world exchanges. I think the dollar will find strength again when they raise interest rates. And then when you look at really how much, Russia is dealing with, what is the size of their GDP? Well, by the way, I very, very, very much respect Jim Sinclair, and he's the tops in commodities when I look at him. He's been around a long time and knows a lot. I'm just looking at it a little bit differently in the sense that I see instability everywhere. I don't see a safe haven currency. I believe the United States dollar will have a very, very long and hard fall. But as I said, I think it's going to be long. I don't think it's going to be sudden. And the reason being is that where is the fallback position?
I agree on this. And there are a lot of discussions out there because Jim Rickards is publishing his new book, Death of Money.